Hello and welcome back to a document deep dive. This time we'll be taking a look at 1st Gebirgsjäger Division, which are these guys. And these photos are part of a series of propaganda shots which were taken in 1942, near the end of 1942, in the Caucasus Mountains, which are obviously kind of at the edge of Europe, which is one part of the reason why these were nice propaganda shots. It's as far as the Germans got into Asia, so to speak. And these were taken, as far as I know, near Mount Elbrus, which is the highest mountain, and which was conquered by these in a weird operation that apparently had Hitler quite angry at them. At least that's what you always hear, that he thought it was basically them doing their hobby in the middle of a war, which I always thought was quite funny. But obviously we're not going to talk about that as much this time. We will just be looking, as always, at some documents. And the interesting question I'm asking here is, how did these guys actually prepare and organize for mountain fighting? And at first, this might seem like a bit of a weird question because it's like, well, they're Gebirgsjäger, right? They're mountaineers. It's literally their job. Now, the interesting thing is that so far they have not actually, or they had not actually operated in high alpine territory, like in really high mountains. They were used in kind of rough, medium-sized mountain-type terrain during the Poland operation. And then obviously the war against Russia was on, and if you've ever looked at a map of Russia, you will note that the mountains start quite far into Russia. So throughout 1941 and especially the first half of 1942, they were actually engaged in fighting in the steppe, which is like the least mountainous terrain you can imagine. Now, there were other Gebirgsjäger divisions. Again, I'm talking about the first one here. There are other Gebirgsjäger divisions, which, for example, were used in the high north, in Norway, Finland, attacking from Finland into the Soviet Union. These didn't. And they had taken heavy casualties. And now, after fighting in the steppe for a year, it's finally time to do the actual job, go into high mountains. And what happened then? Well, we will see. Now, the first thing I want to look at, as often the case, is the divisional diagram. Now, this is from the 1st of February 1943, which was after they had to leave the Caucasus rather abruptly due to the catastrophe at Stalingrad, which made the position untenable. So this is what they looked like after they had already lost quite a few people. And as always, we will look at the artillery first. Now, we already looked at Jäger divisions, which had a similar type of artillery. They had mountain guns here. So these all are mountain guns, which means they could be packed up and moved by a mule and such. Well, these are light mountain guns, as far as I understand, and these are the heavier howitzers. So these are probably 75 and these 105 millimeters. And you can see here how many they were ought to have, 4, and how many they had, 2, or in this case the full battery was still up. They did lose quite a bit of artillery, including some, as far as I'm aware, because they were almost encircled during the chaotic battles in the Caucasus, together with the 13th and 23rd Panzer Division. Maybe I will make a video about that at some point. They also had a heavy truck-borne, or truck-towed battery here of, battalion here of heavy guns, which I think were either 105 millimeter or even 150 millimeter. And as always, you can see at the side here how much personnel they had left, so they had taken some losses here as well. Now, the infantry here, and this is interesting, these are their standard 2 mountaineer regiments, the 99th and the 98th, but they also had this attached for this operation. This is Hochgebirgs Battalion, which means the High Alpine Battalion. So these were the actual High Alpine specialists. And I have not actually found that many interesting documents about this unit in particular, but these were actually the ones who were trained in the stuff like climbing up sheer cliff faces and so on. And you can see they were kind of operating like a normal infantry battalion. They had 4 infantry companies here and 10 light machine guns, and then it says 8 down here, which is how many they actually had. The fact that they had 10 on paper indicates to me that these already had a later organization with 3 squads in each platoon. Now, if we look at the normal line mountaineer infantry here, it's a bit different. For one thing, what you will notice, they were supposed to have 12 light machine guns, and sometimes after the end of the operation they actually had more, so these had 15. It's not quite clear if these were taken over from some unit or if these were captured. It doesn't really say here. What it does show though is that on paper they had 12, which means 4 squads in each platoon, which was the standard early war operation, or the organization, sorry. And these were also heavily depleted, by the way, so these had 51% losses, so less than half strength in the 2nd Battalion of the 98th here. So yeah, that's actually quite devastating and shows how tough that was. Now, this unit here, the 2nd Battalion of the 99th, actually apparently was either already filled up or they did not suffer that many losses, and these are actually this is actually the unit that we have an experience report from, which we will look at later. And as you can see, they were pretty much still kind of up to strength. Now, in general, we can see here 12 light machine guns, 2 heavy machine guns in each company. Then they had light mortars, 3. Not 100% sure what this is. These might actually be Panzerbüchse. So Panzerbüchse 39. I have seen a similar symbol used later for Panzerschrecks, so my guess is that would be that, because for a Panzerschreck it's still a bit early. So yeah, how did they actually make themselves ready for fighting in the mountains? Okay, so this here is order number 1 for switching the division for mountain warfare. And what you might expect here mostly is stuff like how to climb the mountains or something, and there are lists of different equipment that you need for that, which are quite interesting, but the main thing here are supplies, Versorgung, and this makes a lot of sense if you think about it. How were German units supplied? Train, tough enough, especially if you're on an offensive operation and you are in Soviet territory. The trains don't drive on the narrow gauge railroad. That's a big problem. After that, trucks and of course horse-drawn carriage. Good luck getting a truck or a horse-drawn carriage on top of a mountain. So it says here, in order to ensure resupply in a high alpine environment, or in high alpine passes, we need a complete pack animal battalion. 1,000 horses, mules, and what do you call in English that mix between horses and mules, right? So 1,000, at least 1,000 of these pack animals, and a carrier battalion, as in people who carry stuff, of 2,000 men, which would have to be taken from the other units. So they were taken from combat units and assigned to carry supplies up the mountain. Now, obviously, you don't actually want to do that, and it says here that in order to get these carriers and as well as pack animal leaders, they should look into POW camps and the civilian population. I don't know how many of those they actually got, but it seems like you can already tell that this was a kind of hasty and ramshackle operation if they already talk about getting Russians to do this, which is very important work. Now, if we go down a little bit, it also says that so they specify which officers and staffs are to be in charge of this and where people are coming from to organize this. We will skip over this to a degree. It also says here that they need to get equipment, namely carriages, saddles for the pack animals, sleds, and carrying frames for people. So they didn't have that. They had to organize that relatively quickly. And they had a deadline here until the 12th of August to do that. And down here they say where they want to have like an equipment camp or an equipment depot to get everything together. So basically they were at this point scrambling both for pack animals, for carriers, either from the division or from the civilian population or POWs, and they were looking for various carrying equipment to make their division mountain ready. They also made plans for shelters, because you have to build your own shelters in the mountains. Makes a lot of sense. So there are a bunch of these. I just want to show these as an example. There were actually, for example, so these are for personnel. These are for soldiers to sleep in and live in. For example, there's a table here. There were also specialized ones for putting pack animals in, that kind of thing. And as you can see, the idea is you build them into a slope, so you dig a part out of a slope here and then build that in, and you then put earth as well as tree branches and such on top in order to camouflage it. And so this is a small shelter for like a half squad of 4 to 5 men with beds in here, pretty cozy. Nice with a bench here, and then 8 to 10 men obviously. 12 to 40 men, that would be like a complete squad and maybe like a part of the HQ. So yeah, this is the kind of thing that they built in the high mountains, which is interesting considering, I mean, I'm not an archaeologist, but I'd expect you could maybe find some parts of this still up there, because the high mountains are probably an area where things don't degrade quite as quickly, I would imagine. Then again, there's probably a lot of erosion here. If there's anybody here who has an actual archaeologist, can you tell me about like preservation of structures in the high alpine environment? That would be quite interesting. Now, as I said, I have an experience report here from the 2nd Battalion, 99th Regiment, and it says here that this battalion actually advanced behind an advance unit of von Hirschfeld, that's the name of the commander of this Kampfgruppe, and they advanced up the valley of the Kuban River, and yeah, so they were not at the tip of the spear, and they had to regroup for high alpine combat, and for that what they did, and this is quite interesting, we're going to zoom in here a little bit. So they basically split up into resupply and the actual battle unit. So many of those who were just in the standard line infantry were put into this resupply staff here. And the Jäger companies were actually made significantly weaker because of that, because they couldn't resupply all the people on top of the mountain. So basically what they mean by that is the whole battalion had, of course, a staff, and then they had 3 Jäger companies, which had the company HQ, and then they had one specialist group, which were 11 guys, one squad leader, 10 men. And these were the guys who actually were able to climb and who were actually specialists in mountain warfare, because in other documents, and this is interesting, they complain that they almost have nobody with actual alpine experience, because there were so many so many casualties in Russia so far that almost nobody is left from the original Gebirgsjäger stock, so to speak, right? So they have this one specialist group including like a mountain leader and experienced men. And then each company had 3 platoons, which only had 2 squads. So they halved their platoons, and the rest were sent for resupply, in part also because the men in there were not actually useful for mountain combat. And so they had only 2 squads in each platoon. One squad leader, 12 men, so 13 people, which is quite high. Something like that was only like standard in the really early infantry TOEs. And then one heavy machine gun group in each company with 2 heavy machine guns. So they took the heavy machine guns with them. And then, of course, there was a heavy company, which again had a company HQ. They had a heavy mortar platoon with 3 mortars, so 8 centimeter. Infantry gun platoon with 2 infantry guns, and a heavy machine gun platoon with 4 heavy machine guns, and these were MG41. These were MG42. In many of the other documents, they call them MG42. This guy apparently didn't get the memo, he calls them MG41. But they were MG42s, I checked. And then down here, as I said, the rest were in the resupply unit, and they were there to carry up all the stuff for these guys up the mountain. Now, what's interesting is that he also lists how many weapons each unit had because of that, which to us is interesting because it will allow us to, on a very low level, reconstruct what these units looked like in this high alpine configuration. So, for example, a Pioneer platoon had 4 LMGs and 6 MPs, so 6 MP40s basically. So what we're looking at, though, the Jäger company, and now it gets interesting, 7 LMGs, 2 SMGs, so 7 light machine guns, 2 heavy machine guns. Now, as you probably remember, we looked at their divisional document. They had 12 light machine guns for each company. So this means these are the ones that were actually used by the groups that were on the mountain. These were actually used by the battle groups. These are not the ones that are still with the resupply troops. Because, and this gets interesting here, it seems like there was some weapon systems that they just left with these squads. So the LMGs, every squad had 1 LMG, they just left it there, possibly because they wouldn't be able to resupply more LMGs because they wouldn't be able to get the additional ammunition up the mountain anyway. However, other weapon systems were apparently taken from the guys who were down, at the bottom of the mountain or carrying stuff up, and pooled in the combat troops, namely 12 sniper rifles. We will talk about that a bit more, and 12 submachine guns. Though it seems like they took the submachine guns and sniper rifles from the other troops and put them up on the mountain. And it also says here, if you want to read that, how much ammunition they had for each of them, and down here it's how much they had in terms of food and also in terms of feed for the animals. One interesting stuff, they apparently had dogs in order to carry orders and such around, but this didn't work because these animals were apparently trained to follow some kind of chemical that they put down to mark their path, and this doesn't work in the high mountain, and also they had to carry that stuff up, so they didn't really use them, but quite interesting here. So, let's look at the weapons. It says here, the hand weapons were a mix of Carabiner 98K and the 33/40. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Gewehr 33/40 is basically a Czech version of the K98K that's significantly shorter, which was only used by the Gebirgsjäger. As far as I know, it was only produced until 1942, and then it was dropped and replaced by the K98K in that factory. But okay, they had a mix of those two. They complain about the G33/40. They say it is better for mountain warfare because it's smaller, but they also say it is less accurate than the K98K, and apparently it breaks very easily because of the wood the stocks are made from. So they're not that convinced by it. What they're also not convinced by are the new, it says here, the new scopes, which have 1.5 times magnification. These are obviously the ZF-41, which apparently were newly received for this battle, or this operation. And as we saw earlier, apparently they had 12 in each company, which is quite a lot, especially if you pull them together. They didn't really like them though, because the magnification is too small and also the field of view. And it says here that the Russians have scopes of 4 times magnification, but they are a bit too big, and what they want is a scope with a 2.5 to 3 times magnification. That would be the most useful one. So, number 3, they did not receive German automatic rifles, the battalion, so no G41s. So, but they also say that they often used Russian looted rifles, and they really had good experiences with them. And they think that 1 to 2 automatic rifles for each squad would be nice. So yeah, SVT-40s apparently in use here. They had rifle grenade launchers and they really liked them. Great. Then they say here that the machine pistols, they often fail to work, which they mostly say is due to the magazines. And now it says here that in addition to the MG34, they had 4 MG41, again these were MG42s, as a heavy machine gun. They really like them. They say that there were no resupply issues due to the higher rate of fire, and they want more of them. This allows us to reconstruct what a platoon of these Gebirgsjägers in the Caucasus 1942 would have looked like. So, as always, I took the liberty of making a little graphic here. So we have the platoon HQ here, and then there's two groups, which was all that was left. The rest was stripped down. Each group would have one light machine gun. I speculate here that maybe the G33/40 was used by the guys carrying the ammunition for the light machine gun. This is why I put them next to that. That said, there's nothing in the document that indicates that. What's interesting is, for one thing, due to them pooling together their submachine guns, just by calculating, it seems quite possible that each group could have had two submachine guns, one rifle grenade launcher, and actually two of these sniper rifles. They didn't like them. Maybe they took their scopes off at some point, but they had 12 in each of these companies, so that would indicate 2 per squad would have been possible. And then I also put in 2 Russian semi-automatic rifles here for detailing. Obviously these are not in the documents, but they do mention that they use them, so that would make a lot of sense. Possibly with a K98K as backup somewhere further back, but yeah. So yeah, that's probably what they looked like in 1942 up in the mountains of the Caucasus. Now, some of you probably looked at that diagram that I made and were like Leonardo DiCaprio in that Tarantino movie and be like, hey, I've seen that somewhere. Yeah, this is a map that I've made for FH2 like years ago. Motovsky Bay, which also features a Gebirgsjäger unit, but not in high alpine territory, but instead in Arctic territory, namely at Motovsky Bay, as I said, in the north. And as you see, the loadout is quite similar to what we can see in the documents for the 1st Gebirgsjäger Division, although, as I said, this was a different unit. And yeah, this is the G33/40, the Czech Gebirgsjäger rifle, which really was just a shortened K98K that apparently breaks quite easily. But in game, of course, you can shoot it nicely. Last but not least, we're gonna take a look at this division at the end of World War II. It was renamed to Volksgebirgsdivision, I guess because they will fight harder then. As you can see, this is from the 1st of March 1945. And if we look here, the artillery is still somewhat similar, although this time they have actually marked the caliber for their mountain guns, so that's nice of them. They apparently received a battery of 10 centimeter K18 guns at some point. They obviously don't have the high alpine specialist troops anymore because they weren't fighting in that terrain at this point. And if you look at their troops, though, they still had 12 light machine guns, or sometimes 13 in many of these, in many cases here, which indicates that maybe they still had 4 squads, or yeah. In some of them, though, they have the normal 10 for a late war organization with 3 squads, so it's quite hard to tell. I haven't found any information about that. Now, what's quite interesting here, they had some captured, or one captured Russian gun here instead of one of their infantry guns, so there's a bit of stuff like that. And if we look at their the guns that they had, it seems like they never received SDG-44s. They still had quite a few MP40s. Sadly, it doesn't tell us how many of each of these they had. So K98K, G41 or G43, and scoped rifles, they just pooled together here under rifles, as you can see. So we don't know exactly how that changed. So yeah, other than that, nothing spectacular in here, but I thought it would be quite interesting to look at them at the end of the war. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that and found it interesting. I'm pretty sure I'm the first one to actually show this kind of organization. At least I haven't seen anything about that on the internet, so I hope I showed you something new there. Other than that, thanks for watching and have a nice day.